If you want peace, you will wed my daughter, Human. The pen dropped. It rolled under the plastic chair, and I watched it go like it owed me money. That was how I was spending my Tuesday, counting ceiling tiles, watching a pen roll away, waiting for a doctor who was 40 minutes late to look at my ribs and tell me they were healing fine, same as the doctor last month told me, same as the doctor the month before that. The Veterans Administration waiting room in Charleston smelled like burnt coffee and defeat, and the television on the wall was running a news loop about the ceasefire talks with the Threll Dominion going sideways again. I had stopped watching the news 18 months ago. Nothing good ever happened on it. The pen stopped rolling. It sat there under the chair, and I thought about getting up to grab it. My ribs made the decision for me. Threll-grade shrapnel does not come out clean. It leaves something behind, a kind of pressure that lives below the skin, and any time I bent forward too fast, it sent a message. The message was always the same, not today. So the pen stayed where it was. The front door opened, not the examination room door, the main entrance. Two men in suits walked in, and I knew from the way they moved, straight lines, no hesitation, eyes already on target, that they were not here for physicals. They were looking at me before they crossed the room. "Cole Marsh?" the taller one said. "Depends on what you are selling." He did not smile. "Deputy Director Kevin Lowe, Department of Interspecies Affairs. This is Agent Pete Doran." I looked back at the television. What the news ticker read, Threll Dominion Matriarch Issue Statement. Ceasefire status, critical. "You need to come with us," Lowe said. "I have a doctor's appointment." We rescheduled it. I looked at him then, really looked. He had the face of a man who had not slept in 3 days, who had been handed a problem that could not be fixed, and had decided the best approach was to carry it to someone else's door. He was looking at me the way a man looks at an unexpected solution he is not yet sure will hold. I picked up my jacket off the chair beside me. The pen could stay. They drove me to a federal building downtown I had not known existed, which meant it was not supposed to exist, which meant whatever was happening lived above the level where paperwork got filed. The elevator went down, not up. The room we arrived in had a table, 3 chairs, a screen on the wall, and a man sitting at the far end whom I recognized immediately. General Dale Pruitt, retired. The kind of retired where they still call you back when things go wrong enough. "Cole," he said. "General. Sit down." I sat. Lowe and Doran took the other chairs. The screen on the wall lit up with a star map. The Threll Dominion was marked in red, which told you something about whoever had put the presentation together. "You speak Threll," Pruitt said. It was not a question. "Some. 40 dialects, according to your file, including High Court Threll. I learned it in a foxhole from a dying Threll soldier who thought teaching me curse words was funnier than passing out. 40 dialects is generous. I know about 12 well, and the rest I can fake when I have to." Pruitt nodded. "You were deployed on Threll-occupied Kerrigan Station during the last push. You treated Threll wounded after the ceasefire line held. I was a medic. That is what medics do. The Threll Matriarch's office specifically named you." The room went quiet. Not the comfortable kind. "Named me for what?" I said. Lowe pulled a document from a folder and slid it across the table. It was printed in Threll script on one side and translated on the other. I read the translated side. I read it again. I set it down. "Her daughter," I said. "Vaskthura, the matriarch's only surviving child and heir to the Dominion." Pruitt folded his hands on the table. "The Threll have a tradition. When 2 nations are to be formally bound after a conflict, the binding is made through alliance by marriage. Not symbolic, legal. Binding under Threll law, which at this point is the law that matters, given that they have a fleet of 47 warships sitting at the edge of our operational reach." 49, Doran said, quietly, from his end of the table. 49, Pruitt confirmed. I sat with that for a moment. "And they want me," I said. "She wants you, specifically. By name, by service record number, by the scar on your left ribs that she apparently described in detail in her communication, which is something none of us can fully explain. The scar pressed in right on cue. What happens if I say no? I asked. Lowe answered that one, The matriarch's statement was fairly direct on that point. I looked at the document again. The last line of the translated section read, "There is no alternative proposal." I thought about the news ticker. Ceasefire status, critical, 49 warships. When? I said. "You leave Friday," Pruitt said. "A Threll transport is waiting at Orbital Station 9. The journey is 11 days. The ceremony is expected within 3 weeks of arrival. Is there going to be a briefing document, or am I walking in with nothing?" He pushed a second folder across the table. "Everything we have on Vascthara is in there. Her political position, her history, her alignment within the Threll court. Read it on the transport." I took the folder. It was thin. Too thin for a woman whose decision was apparently the only thing holding a ceasefire together with both hands. "Nobody knows why she picked me," I said. Lowe hesitated. Half a second, I caught it. "Nobody is saying," I said. He did not correct me. I stood. My ribs sent the message. I ignored it the same way I had been ignoring it for 3 years. "I will need better shoes," I said. "Whatever you pack me in, Threll court floors are stone. The cold goes right through standard-issue boots. I know from experience." Nobody laughed. That was fine. I was not done being scared yet. I just did not have a better way to carry it. Friday came. I packed light. A medic learns quickly. Only carry what you can run with. Orbital Station 9 was a transfer hub, all function and no warmth. My government escort handed me over at the gate to a Threll liaison named Dresh, who was roughly 2 meters tall, covered in the gray-scaled skin that made every Threll look like they were wearing body armor even at rest, and who studied me the way a person studies a stray dog that has wandered somewhere it does not belong. He spoke to me in clipped High Court Threll, formalized greeting, upper register. I answered in the same register. His eye ridge moved, just slightly, the expression of a person who had expected something simple and found it was not. Good. Complicated was something I knew how to work with. The transport was large by human standards. By Threll standards it was mid-range, a courier vessel used for personnel and messages, rather than war. My cabin was the size of a generous closet. The gravity was 1.2 standard, which I had been briefed on and which did not make it any easier to feel my own weight pressing down wrong from the moment we cleared dock. I sat on the bunk and opened the folder on Vascthara. Read the same 12 pages 4 times. Looked for what was not in them. She was 26 by Threll reckoning, which translated to roughly 31 in human years. She had served in the Dominion's diplomatic corps since the end of the war. Her older brother, the heir before her, had died during the conflict. Location and circumstances, classified. I closed the folder. Classified was a word that always meant someone knew and had decided you did not need to. The transport shuddered as it cleared the station's pull and moved into open space. I felt the station fall away. Earth somewhere behind it. Everything I knew about myself getting smaller with the distance. I thought about the document, the last line. There is no alternative proposal. I thought about Vascthara, 26 Threll years old, heir to a Dominion with 49 warships, who had gone through whatever internal political process it took to select a name from a war record and build a demand around it. My name. I reached into my jacket pocket and found the pin from the VA waiting room. I had picked it up from the floor on the way out. No particular reason. Habit. I turned the light off and let the gravity press me into the bunk. I counted my ribs the way I always did when I could not sleep, locating the scar by pressure, tracing the edge of it with 2 fingers, the way a man checks a wound that never fully closed. Someone on this transport, or maybe on the planet I was heading toward, already knew that scar was there. I did not know what that meant yet. I was going to find out. The Threll homeworld was called Varketh. No human had set foot on it before the ceasefire. During the war, it was the coordinate every commanding officer used when they wanted to remind their soldiers what the worst possible outcome looked like. We did not take it, because taking it would have ended the war in a way that left nobody standing, which was the kind of winning that only looked like winning from very far away. From ground level, it was something entirely different. The sky was a deep amber, not quite orange, not quite brown, like the last 10 minutes of a sunset that had decided to stay permanently. The buildings were carved stone, rising in irregular formations that looked less like architecture and more like the planet itself had grown upward over centuries. The air was breathable, barely, like breathing at high elevation, that thin edge of not quite enough that made a person conscious of every single inhale. The gravity at 1.2 made every step feel like I was wearing a backpack I had not agreed to carry. My knees registered a complaint on the first staircase. My ribs filed a formal protest. Dresh led me through the outer court of the matriarch's compound, which was the Threll word for what humans would call a palace, except that Threll palaces did not announce themselves. No flags, no ceremonial gates with guards in decorative armor, just long corridors of carved stone where the walls seemed to remember every weight that had ever passed through them. Dresh spoke to me only in operational terms. Turn here, wait here. Remove the outer jacket before entering the formal hall, which was a piece of information he waited until I was standing in front of the formal hall to share. I removed the jacket. He inspected my arms briefly, checking for anything that might read as a weapon. My scar was visible on my left side where the shirt rode up slightly. He noted it without expression. I noted him noting it. We both pretended neither of us had. The formal hall was where I was scheduled to receive my first official greeting from the matriarch's court steward. The ceremony involved 3 components: a spoken acknowledgement of the house I represented, a physical reception gesture, and a return phrase in High Court Threll signaling my willingness to enter as a recognized guest rather than a managed visitor. The distinction, my briefing document had noted, was important. I stood before the court steward, a tall Threll whose ceremony robes moved like they weighed nothing. He spoke the greeting, perfectly formal, every syllable deliberate. I answered. There was a pause. His eye ridge moved approximately 1 centimeter upward. I had just told him, in impeccably accented High Court Threll, that I arrived in gratitude and with open hands. What I had intended to say was that I arrived in peace and with honest intention. The word for peace and the word for gratitude were separated in High Court Threll by a single tonal shift I had apparently missed. Open hands was correct. Honest intention had a vowel I had not pronounced right. What I had offered instead was open hands, which in casual Threll meant empty-handed, and in formal Threll meant I came here ready to beg. A sound came from somewhere behind me. Low, controlled, the specific sound of a person fighting very hard not to laugh. I turned. The figure standing at the far end of the hall was dressed in a deep gray uniform without insignia, arms crossed, watching me with the particular expression of someone who has been waiting to see whether a person was going to be interesting or disappointing and has just received their answer. I had assumed, from the stillness and the positioning, that the figure was a guard. She had the practiced assessment quality of someone trained to stand and observe. She was Threll, which meant she had the height and the scale-patterned skin, though her coloring ran lighter than Dresh's, gray shading into pale silver at the jaw and temples. She had a scar on her left wrist that caught the hall light when she uncrossed her arms. I had spent enough years with field wounds to read a scar the way other people read handwriting. The edges were older, clean-healed. The shape was narrow and curved, the specific pattern left by a particular kind of human-made weapon. The guard watched me look at the scar. She did not move her wrist away. "Your accent is West Varkethian," she said, in Threll, a dialect rarely spoken in formal settings. It sounds to court ears like someone explaining directions to their grandmother. "That is about what I was going for," I said, in Threll. She tilted her head, half a degree. "You were told to say you arrived in peace and with honest intention," she said. "I was. You said you came ready to beg." I am choosing to read that as an honest start. The court steward was watching this exchange with the expression of a man whose protocol had just walked off a cliff and who was trying to decide whether to file a report about it. The figure walked toward me, not quickly, not slowly, the way a person moves when they have already made a decision and are simply in the process of carrying it out. She stopped 3 feet away and studied my face with a directness that had nothing performative about it. This was information gathering, I had seen it before in field medics and in soldiers who had survived long enough to learn that survival began with accurate assessment. "Vask Thara," she said. The floor seemed to shift. Not literally. The stone was solid. My knees simply communicated that they had not been prepared for this particular moment, even though I should have been, even though some part of me had been building toward it for 11 days, with nothing but a thin folder and too much time. "Cole Marsh," I said. "I know who you are." She said it without any particular weight. "Just a fact. You were not supposed to see me until the formal introduction tomorrow. I was observing early. Standard reconnaissance." "Yes." "Good practice," I said. "I do the same thing, though in my case it is mostly counting exits." Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile, more like the consideration of one. "How many exits in this hall?" she said. "4. One behind you that looks decorative but is not. One beside the steward's position that goes to service corridors, the main door, and one in the ceiling that has not been used recently but could be." She looked at me for 3 full seconds. "3, she said. "The ceiling access is sealed. Still counts as a rote, if you are motivated enough." She looked away from me then, which was the first time she had. She turned to the court steward and spoke to him briefly in a register I did not fully catch. He bowed and left. Dresch followed. The hall emptied of everyone except the 2 of us. "Walk with me," Vask said. We walked. The corridor she led me through ran behind the formal rooms, a passage that felt lived in a way the ceremony spaces did not. The stone here was darker from years of use. Small objects were mounted on the walls at intervals, carved and polished, and I recognized enough of the iconography to know they were memorial markers. There were a lot of them. I did not count them out loud. I filed the number in the part of my mind that had learned, over years of war and years of not quite peace, that some information was meant to be held quietly. "You learned your threll from a soldier," Vask said, "not a question." He thought it was funny, teaching the human his language while he was bleeding out. He kept laughing at my pronunciation even through the pain because it was funnier than the alternative. "He survived," she said. "I got to him in time. He is alive somewhere on your side of the line." "I know," she said. I looked at her. "His name was Dravish," she said. "He is in the northern garrison now. He told his unit about the human medic who spoke like a grandmother giving directions. It reached my attention eventually. My file, the thin one, someone had been filling its gaps from the other side for 3 years. We stopped at the end of the corridor. There was a window, or what served as a window, an opening in the stone that framed the amber sky. The light came through warm and heavy, and Vask stood in it for a moment without speaking. "Your folder about me was incomplete," she said. I noticed. "My brother's death is listed as classified." "Yes. He died at Kerrigan Station." She said it the way a person says something they have said to themselves so many times that it has worn smooth from the handling. "During the last offensive, before the ceasefire line held. My unit had held that line. I knew it. She knew I knew it. I treated Threll wounded after that engagement," I said. "I do not have a list of names. I do not know if your brother was among them." "He was not." She turned from the window. Her expression was still precise, controlled, every detail in its correct position. "He died before the medics reached that section of the field. I am not telling you this to assign blame, Cole. I am telling you so there are no gaps between us, that someone else can use later." That was a more direct opening than most people I had worked with managed in far more time. "Why me?" I said. "The full answer. The full answer is longer than this corridor allows on a first meeting," she said. "But Dravj spoke of you, and that was the beginning of it." "Fair," I said. "You are not what the court expected," she said. It was not a compliment, not a criticism either, more like an inventory result she was still processing. What did they expect? A soldier who would try to impress them, or one who would be frightened and try to hide it? You are doing neither. I am doing both, I said. I am just not advertising it. The thing that moved across her expression that time was closer to a smile, and it lasted about 1 full second before it put itself away somewhere. We walked back through the corridor in something that was not quite comfortable silence, but was closer to it than I had expected. My room, which they called a guest chamber, was the size of a small apartment. It had a writing desk, a bed built for Threll proportions that I was going to slide off in the night at some point, and a window that looked out on the inner garden, stone paths and plants I did not recognize, and in the low amber evening light, it looked exactly like the kind of place where important things happened when no one was watching. I sat on the edge of the bed. The gravity pressed down. I pressed back. I thought about what Vask had said. No gaps between us that someone else can use later. That was the sentence of someone who had already mapped the threat landscape and was thinking 2 moves ahead of it. I opened my left hand and looked at the palm. The calluses from the medic bag straps. The small burn scar from a field kit that had failed 6 years ago. A soldier who had treated the wounded on both sides. A medic who spoke a language he had learned from the enemy while keeping him alive. That was what she had chosen. I turned off the light. Let the amber glow from the window replace it. My ribs ached. The gravity here made everything carry more weight than it should. I was already thinking in exits. The gala was described in my preparation documents as an informal gathering of the court's senior houses. The document was wrong on both counts. There was nothing informal about 200 Threll nobles filling a hall the size of a football field in their most formal attire while conducting a quiet, thorough assessment of the human guest from a distance that was technically polite and actually was not. And it was not a gathering, it was an examination. I had been given formal clothing that morning. The Threll concept of formal guest attire was a layered thing, dark fabric over darker fabric, with a structured collar meant to sit at the base of the jaw. It sat at my collarbone instead because Threll proportions assumed a neck that was roughly 4 inches longer than mine. My government liaison, a man named Greg Hale who had arrived the previous day on a diplomatic shuttle and had been stress eating from his personal protein ration supply ever since, spent 20 minutes adjusting the collar before giving up and calling me presentable in a tone that made it clear he was using the word loosely. "Stay close to me," Greg had said. "Do not engage unless someone engages you first. If someone speaks Threll at you, redirect to the interpreter." "I speak Threll," I said. "I know, do not." "Why?" He looked at me steadily. "Because if they know you understand Threll, they will say things to each other in your presence that they would normally filter. That creates political incidents. That sounds like useful information. It is not your job to collect it tonight." That arrangement had lasted approximately 40 minutes, at which point Greg got pulled aside by a junior diplomatic aide dealing with a catering dispute between 2 houses that had a historical grievance I had not been briefed on, and I continued in the direction I had already been heading, toward the least occupied corner of the room. The problem with the least occupied corner was that it was only that way because it was where they had placed the food service station. The food at a Threll state function was presented on long stone tables with carved serving pieces, arranged according to the Threll tradition of aesthetic order, grouped by color and shape rather than by type, or, importantly, by whether the items were still in motion. One tray held what appeared to be small pastry shells. I picked one up. It vibrated. I set it back down. The serving attendant, a young Threll in a gray uniform, watched me with the expression of someone who had been waiting to see exactly that reaction. "Is that normal?" I said, "In Threll." His eye ridges went up. "The Creval pastries are served fresh. The filling is alive until consumed. It is considered a mark of quality." "That is great," I said. "Where are the things that have already made peace with their situation?" He stared. "Cooked," I said. "Not moving." He pointed toward the far end of the table, where a platter of something dark and dense sat, with exactly 0 nobles near it. I moved to it. I served myself 3 portions of something that smelled like smoked wood and tasted, remarkably, like a slightly wrong version of slow-cooked beef. I decided it was the best thing I had eaten in 2 weeks, and gave it my full attention. This was approximately when a Threll noble materialized at my left shoulder. "The human eats the funeral bread," he said, loudly enough to be heard by the 3 nobles nearest to him. His dialect was Upper Southern Threll, which ran toward contemptuous expressions when it wanted to. I chewed, swallowed. "Is that what this is?" I said, still in thrall, still looking at the food. "What is the occasion?" A small silence. He had not expected the language. "The bread is ceremonially offered at the conclusion of mourning," he said, adjusting his tone. "Eating it at a celebration is considered—" He let the pause carry the rest. "Tone deaf?" I offered. "Precisely," he said. I looked at him then. He was large for Threll, which meant large by any standard, dressed in house colors I recognized from the briefing folder as House Vreth, one of the families that had lost significant military personnel during the Kerrigan Station engagement. "I spent 3 years as a combat medic," I said, "and 3 more years after that trying to convince a government I was fine when I was not. I have been eating at the table nobody wants to sit at for longer than this gala has been in planning. It seems honest to me." His eye ridges flattened. In Threll physiology, that was the equivalent of a long, narrow look. "You ended Threll lives," he said. "It was not delivered with heat. It was worse than that. It was a verdict delivered by someone who had already finished the trial in private. I treated Threll lives," I said. "Same as I treated human lives. The ones I reached in time are mostly still alive. The ones your unit engaged at Kerrigan Station are not. The ones any unit engaged on either side of that engagement are not." I set the plate down. "I am not going to pretend that is simple. It is not, but I will not accept a charge that does not match the record. You stand in our home as a guest of this court, and you argue. I am not arguing, I am correcting the record." The temperature in that corner of the hall had dropped. The 2 nobles who had been close enough to hear had gone still in the way people go still, when they are deciding whether to step closer or step back. She stepped closer. Vask moved through the room the way a current moves through water, without announcing itself. She was in full formal court attire now, deep blue and silver with the house insignia at the collar, and the room adjusted to her presence, the way rooms adjust to people whose authority has become automatic over time. She stopped beside me, not in front of me, beside me, and looked at the noble from House Vreth. She said 7 words in High Court Threll, formal to the point of being ceremonially bladed. What she said, translated loosely, was that House Vreth's representative had given his opinion and it had been received, and the matter was concluded. The noble held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then he inclined his head exactly as protocol required, and moved away. No one came to fill the space he left. "You spoke, Threll," Vask said, looking forward. "Greg told me not to. Greg was right. I know. I will hear about it tomorrow." She looked at the platter of funeral bread. She looked at me. "You knew what it was," she said. "I worked that out around the 2nd piece. And you kept eating. It was the best thing on the table." She was quiet for a moment. The gala continued around us, the sweep of formal conversation in a language half familiar to me, the amber warmth of the hall lights, the weight of 200 gazes that were professionally pretending not to watch. "He lost a son at Kerrigan Station," Vask said. She was not defending the noble. She was placing him on a map so I could read it accurately. "I know. I can read house colors. And you still answered him the way you did. He said something false about me in public. How much he is hurting and whether the record is accurate are 2 separate things. Both of them matter." Vask turned to face me fully, which in the formal Threll context was a deliberate act that would be noted and reported and discussed by morning. "There are members of this court who do not want this alliance," she said, low and precise. "They will use any opening. I know. You just handed them the image of a human arguing with a grieving noble on the first formal occasion." "Or," I said, "I handed them the image of a human who does not roll over when something untrue is said to his face, depending on which kind of court you are trying to build." She held my gaze for a long moment. Someone near the main doors laughed at something across the hall. A serving attendant passed behind us, carrying the tray of still-moving pastries. "My brother's name was Vareth," she said. 4 words, delivered the way a person sets down something heavy they have been carrying in a private location for a very long time. I said nothing. I did not fill the silence with comfort or questions or an automatic expression of sympathy. I held the weight of it next to her, in the same way I had learned to hold weight in a field tent at 3 in the morning, when there was nothing useful left to say, and the only honest thing was to stay present. He was 21, she said. He believed in the war completely. When it ended, he had been dead for 6 months. I am sorry, I said. That is the 3rd time a human has said that to me. She looked away. The first 2 times it sounded like a form being filled out. I did not ask about the 3rd time. I already understood I was in it. We stood in the corner of the hall together, beside the funeral bread, while the formal event moved around us and carefully did not look. The wedding has been moved up, Vask said, after a while. Her voice was back to its diplomatic precision, sealed over neatly, the way you seal a wound in the field when you do not have time to clean it properly. 3 days from now, instead of 2 weeks. Why? Because 3 days from now, the court will be in full session, and the alliance will be formally recognized, and anyone who intends to object will have to do so publicly and on the record. She turned back toward the hall, and because I have decided 3 days is enough time. I picked up another piece of funeral bread. Is there going to be a rehearsal? I asked. There is a pre-ceremony orientation at dawn. It will tell you where to stand and what to say. I will manage the formal speech. You will need to handle one response phrase. I will teach it to you tomorrow, slowly. I can manage one phrase. You told my court steward you came here ready to beg. I am choosing to read that as setting expectations low so I can exceed them. She moved away. 3 steps, stopped without turning back. Vareth would have argued with you constantly, she said. He found humans exhausting and fascinating in roughly equal measure. She kept walking. I stood there with that, and the funeral bread, and the amber light, and the clear sense that something in the architecture of this room, of this event, of the careful political structure she had built, had shifted in a direction neither of us was ready to name yet. I ate the rest of the bread. Somewhere in the hall, the noble from House Vreth was reporting tonight to someone, and I knew which direction that would travel and what it would be used for. I also knew that Vaskthara had come to stand beside me, not in front of me, and had paid a political cost to do it without a moment's hesitation. I went to find Greg, who was going to need about 45 minutes of being angry before he could be useful again. He had earned every one of them. 3 days was not much time. The pre-ceremony orientation ran at dawn in a small side chamber, stone floors, low amber light, and a senior court official named Hesh, who had the energy of a person who had been organizing rituals for 40 years and had run completely out of patience for people who needed anything repeated. She was thorough and fast, and she treated my questions as confirmation that humans were exactly what she had expected. The ceremony involved 7 formal positions, 2 spoken exchanges, 1 response phrase, 3 pieces of symbolic equipment I was not to touch unless directed, and a concluding gesture. The gesture was simple. Place the right hand, open, against the left collarbone of the other person. In Threll tradition it meant, I vouch for this individual's presence in my home and among my people. Hesh demonstrated it on her assistant. Then she looked at me and waited. The response phrase, I said. She repeated it slowly. I repeated it back. She corrected my second vowel. I said it again. She said nothing in response, which in Hesh's economy of feedback meant I had gotten it right. The trial, I said. Her expression did not shift. All formal alliances include a demonstration of the incoming party's character. The specific form is determined by the house receiving the alliance, and the matriarch's house has chosen a combat demonstration. The matriarch's house observes all traditional forms. What are the parameters? You will be assessed on 3 qualities: adaptability, restraint, and practical resolve. The specific form of the trial will be determined at commencement. So you are not going to tell me what I will be doing. The trial is not a test of preparation. It is a test of character. She held my gaze. Preparation would be cheating. Vask found me afterward in the inner corridor near the memorial markers. She was in her gray uniform again, no court attire, and she walked with the specific purpose of someone who has already decided what they are going to say. "The trial," she said. "I was about to ask you about that. I cannot tell you the specific form. It would be inappropriate." Hesh used the word cheating. "Hesh is not wrong." She paused. "What I can tell you is that house trials for formal alliance are designed to reveal what a person does when the situation stops cooperating. They are not testing strength or technical skill. They are watching how a person responds when the rules become inadequate." "That covers most of my career history," I said. "Yes," she said. "That is part of why I chose you." She had been moving pieces of the full answer toward me, one at a time, like she was checking the ground before she put her full weight on it. "Drav started it," I said, "but that is not all of it." "No." She looked at the memorial markers on the wall. "Dravj told his unit about you. The story traveled. A human medic who stayed with a wounded Threll soldier for 4 hours during active engagement, who learned his language so they could talk rather than sit in silence, who called in evacuation under fire and was injured doing it." She was quiet for a moment. "That story was included in his medical report. I read medical reports, all of them from the Kerrigan Station period." "Why all of them?" I said. "Because my brother's death report was among them. I spent a long time reading every document from that period, trying to understand what had happened and why." She looked at the markers. "In 400 reports, there was one human name that appeared in Threll accounts, described in terms other than combat. I thought about those 4 hours. The cold of the station, a Threll soldier who kept correcting my pronunciation because laughing at it hurt less than everything else." "You built an alliance on 4 hours in a field station," I said. "I built it on evidence of character," she said. "The 4 hours was the evidence." She walked to the window. The amber sky outside was lighter that morning, almost gold at the edges where the sun was coming up. "There are people in this court, working to prevent the ceremony," she said. "I have known for some time. The trial is not the risk I am most concerned about." "Who?" I said. She said a name. I did not know it. Then she gave the house affiliation, and I placed it immediately. The same house that had lost people at Kerrigan Station. The same noble who had spoken to me at the gala. "He has allies in the outer ceremony courtyard," she said. "2 guards and 1 member of the ceremony preparation staff. I believe his plan is disruption during the trial, and possibly during the ceremony itself, if the trial does not succeed." "Do you have evidence?" "Enough to be certain. Not enough to formally charge without creating a second political crisis on top of the first." "And you are telling me?" "Because you will be in the trial courtyard without Greg or a diplomatic escort. Because I think you should know what kind of room you are walking into." She paused. "And because I have already made my decision, and people who have made their decisions deserve the full picture." I looked at the wall of memorial markers, dozens visible from where I stood. More in other corridors, I was certain of it. "Does he know you lost Vareth?" I said. "Everyone in this court knows." "Does he know why you built this instead of something else?" She looked at, "Not yet." The trial was held the following morning in the outer ceremony courtyard, an open stone space ringed by carved walls with observation positions above. The matriarch was present in the observation tier. Hesh was there. Greg was not. He had been politely but firmly excluded by tradition, and had protested this in writing to at least 2 Threll court officials, who had been equally polite and equally firm in return. I stood in the center of the courtyard in standard guest attire. No armor, no equipment. The trial master announced the form: assessment combat, 3 rounds, non-lethal, objective to defend a position against progressively skilled opponents. The qualities being assessed were listed in the announcement: adaptability, restraint, practical resolve. The first opponent was fast, trained, and set to controlled intensity. I spent the first 30 seconds reading the movement style, then spent the next 90 making exactly enough defensive contact to hold my position without escalating. Restraint was on the list. I played to it. Round 2 was harder. The opponent was larger, stronger, and moved with the efficiency of someone who had seen actual combat, rather than just training floors. I gave ground. I absorbed 2 strikes, one across the left shoulder and one across the right side, a threll technique designed to disorient rather than injure. My ribs sent the message again. I redirected and held. At the end of the round, I was still standing in approximately the same place I had started. Round 3 did not begin normally. The trial master announced it. The gates opened. And from the observation wall above, 2 things happened at the same time. A figure entered through the gate, and from the wall, something fell into the courtyard. Not dropped by accident. Thrown. The object was small, ceramic, and broke on the stone with a sharp crack, releasing a cloud of vapor that hit my eyes immediately, blurring everything, filling my nose with a sharp chemical smell. A threll sensory disruptor, non-lethal, effective for approximately 30 seconds. The courtyard filled with controlled chaos. The figure who had come through the gate was not a trial opponent. I knew that from the movement pattern before I could even fully see. This was someone injured, a young attendant from the ceremony preparation staff, who had clearly been pushed through the gate in the confusion and was going down. He was falling. I was moving before the thought finished forming. The vapor was hitting my eyes hard, everything blurring at the edges, the gravity pressing wrong, my ribs registering everything they had. The attendant was down and not orienting correctly, and that was the situation. The situation was what I worked with. I reached him, knelt. The fall had struck the side of his head. There was bleeding, not deep, but the attendant was disoriented and not responding to sound the way someone uninjured would. "Stay still," I said, in threll, as clearly as I could through the blur. "You are all right. Stay still." His hand found my wrist, the grip of someone frightened and trying to hold on to something solid. "I have you," I said. The vapor cleared. 30 seconds, as promised. The courtyard went quiet. The trial master was at the wall, speaking to 2 guards who were holding the noble from House Vreth. His expression was the expression of a man who had committed fully to a path and had just arrived at where it ended. The observation tier was completely still. I looked up at Vask. She was standing at the rail, hands gripping the stone edge, and her expression was locked in the precise, controlled way of someone whose actual reaction was happening entirely underneath the visible surface. The actual reaction was not calm. Her hands did not loosen on the rail until I stood up. The attendant steadied beside me, both of us upright. Then she looked at the noble from House Vreth and held that look for a long, quiet moment. The courtyard had just received all the evidence it needed, and it was not the evidence House Vreth had intended to provide. Greg appeared at the edge of the courtyard, slightly out of breath, already running through the diplomatic calculation that was going to occupy his next 2 days. He looked at me. He looked at the broken ceramic on the ground. He looked at the noble in the guard's hands. He reached into his pocket and ate a protein ration square, without any expression at all. I could not blame him. The trial master crossed the courtyard toward me. He looked at the attendant I was still steadying. He looked at my hands. He looked at the observation tier. He looked at the noble. He turned back to me and made the acknowledging gesture I had been briefed on in orientation. Right hand, open, placed against the left collarbone. I vouch for this individual's presence in my home and among my people. I returned it. The observation tier released a sound that was not quite applause, but was close to it, low and collective. The sound of a room that had been waiting for a question to be answered and had just received its answer. My ribs were going to be filing complaints for the rest of the day. That was fine. I had been carrying that record for 3 years. One more entry was not going to change it. The morning of the ceremony, I woke before the amber light came through the window. I lay on the 2 large bed and listened to the compound settle around me, the sound of old stone and distance and a planet that had existed long before anyone on either side of a ceasefire line had decided to call it a target. I thought about the trial. The noble from House Vreth was in formal house confinement pending council review. The 2 guards he had worked with had been separated from their posts. The ceremony preparation staff member, who had cooperated, had been quietly reassigned without public announcement and without, notably, anyone asking my government's opinion about it. Greg had filed 3 reports overnight. I knew because he had knocked on my door at 2 in the morning to inform me of the exact count. as though I needed to know. "Are you sleeping?" he had asked through the door. "I was," I said. "The matriarch's office wants medical confirmation that you are cleared to proceed. Tell them yes." "Your ribs." "Tell them yes, Greg." A pause. "The noble from House Vreth is claiming provocation." "He can claim whatever he wants." "Cole, today needs to go without additional incidents. Whatever happened yesterday during the trial." "What happened was that somebody was hurt, and I helped them. If that qualifies as an incident, then I need a better definition." Silence. Then, "The attendant is asking to be assigned to your personal staff as a gesture of gratitude, which is apparently a Threll custom I was not briefed on and now need to handle diplomatically without causing offense." "Tell them yes," I said. "You cannot just—" "Greg, 2 in the morning. Tell them yes. File a 4th report if you need to. Let me sleep." He had let me sleep. Now it was morning, and the amber light was beginning at the edge of the window, and I was lying there with 2 fingers pressed against my ribs out of habit, locating the scar by pressure the way a person checks a wound they have carried for a long time. Someone on this planet had read about that scar in a field report, had found a name in 400 documents that looked different from the rest, had built something around it, carefully and deliberately, when other choices were available. I sat up. The gravity pressed down. I pressed back. Hesh came at dawn with 2 members of the ceremony preparation staff, including the new one, a young Threll named Peth, who had a bandage on the left side of his head, and who set about the formal attire adjustments with the focused competence of someone who had decided the best expression of gratitude was excellent work. The collar sat correctly this time. "You measured it," I said. "Last night," he said, smoothing the shoulder piece. "When you were sleeping, I measured the door frame of your chamber. It is approximate, but sufficient for calibration." "That is very thorough." He worked in silence for a moment. His expression was the specific expression of someone who has recently had an experience that recalibrated something important and has not yet finished processing what it changed. "You told me to stay still," he said, carefully. "In the courtyard." "I did." "You were also affected by the disruptor." "Yes." "How did you know where I was?" "I thought about it honestly." "Sound," I said. "The way you hit the stone was specific. I have heard many people fall. The ones who are hurt sound different from the ones who are simply down." He processed this quietly. "You learned that in your training." "In experience," I said. He stepped back and assessed his work. Then he looked at me directly. "The guards who assisted the noble from Vreth," he said, choosing his words with care. "I knew one of them. He had also lost someone at Kerrigan Station. He asked me to leave the preparation room unlocked. He said it was for a message delivery." "You did not know what it was for." "I suspected something was wrong. Not that specific thing." He looked at the floor briefly. "I should have reported it earlier." "Probably," I said. "But you told Vaskhthera afterward. That is what she told me." "I told her before the ceremony was announced, when I understood what the access might be used for." He paused. "It was not soon enough." "No," I said. "But it was something." He gathered the preparation tools, stopped at the door. "The word in Threll, for someone who treats the wounded, on both sides of a conflict," he said. "There is no standard word for it. In Old Threll, there is a term, Varsul. It means approximately, one who does not let the line between us determine the limit of care." He left. I stood in the middle of the chamber in the adjusted formal attire and held that word somewhere below my language centers. Varsul. I had never had a word for it before. The ceremony hall was the largest indoor space I had been in on Varketh, and it was full, not just senior houses, visitors from allied Threll territories, diplomatic observers, military representatives, members of the Matriarch's Council, and the matriarch herself on the elevated formal seat at the far end, flanked by her advisors and framed by the amber light coming through the high stone windows. Greg was in the human observer section to the left of the main proceedings. He looked like a man who had filed 4 reports and was composing a 5th in real time. I walked the entrance processional alone, which was traditional. The path was long enough for me to count exits, assess the room, and note that the guards flanking my route were not wearing the house insignia of anyone connected to the previous day's events. I reached the center of the hall and stopped. Vask entered from the opposite processional and met me there. She was in the full formal attire of the matriarch's house line, deep blue and silver, and the court fell into a specific silence when she walked, the silence of something long anticipated finally arriving. She moved like someone who had made her decision and was finished reconsidering it, because she had. She stopped in front of me. I looked at her the way I had learned to look at people in the field, not at the surface presentation, but at what was running underneath. Her hands were still, not gripping anything. Whatever she had needed to hold on to, she had already let go of it. "Ready?" she said quietly. "One phrase," I said. I practiced. Something crossed her face, the almost smile. It was there for a full second before it put itself away, and this time it was not quite as careful about the departure. We faced the hall together. Hesh's voice carried the opening addresses at a pace that was practiced and precise. The ceremony moved through its stages. I held my positions. I kept track of the response phrase. We reached the fifth stage. The side doors opened. Not ceremonially, fast and deliberate, the way a door opens when someone has decided that the time for waiting is finished. The noble from House Vreth walked in. He was not supposed to be there. His formal confinement to house quarters was binding. Somebody had helped him through it, the last piece of a plan that had been interrupted at the trial but not ended. He was not carrying a weapon. He was carrying a formal challenge document, which in Threll court tradition was a legal instrument. It had to be read aloud to be valid. It had to be read in the presence of the full court. In the presence of the full court, it could not be dismissed without creating its own set of consequences. The hall held still. The document was a formal objection to the alliance on grounds of blood debt unresolved. The Threll legal framework, holding that a party to a formal agreement carried an outstanding obligation arising from deaths in the preceding conflict. The argument was that the alliance could not be valid until the debt was formally acknowledged and addressed. It was a real mechanism, not a fringe legal maneuver. It was the kind of argument that, in a different room with different circumstances, could carry genuine weight. I looked at him while he read. He was not a villain. That was the thing I kept coming back to. He was a man who had lost his child, and had spent 3 years searching for something that still had enough reach to matter. This was the instrument he had found. The grief in him was real, and it had been waiting a long time for somewhere to go. Vask was still beside me. She did not speak immediately. She read the document as he read it, listened to every word, waited the full 3 required seconds of formal acknowledgement before she responded. Then she turned to me. "Cole Marsh," she said, "in High Court Threll, formally, for the record. The challenge cites blood debt arising from the Kerrigan Station engagement. Do you acknowledge the loss of life at that action?" I understood exactly what she was doing. "Yes," I said, "in Threll. Clear." "Do you carry formal responsibility for combat deaths as a designated combatant of your government's forces?" "I carry the history of that engagement," I said. "I treated the wounded on both sides. My formal designation was medical. My record is documented in the materials submitted to this court." The hall was completely quiet. "In the tradition of Varsul," Vask said, using the old term, the one that had reached me that morning through a young Threll, with a bandaged head, who had decided the best use of gratitude was honest work. The blood debt framework exempts those who served without the purpose of ending life. The tradition has not been formally invoked in over 200 years. She looked at her court. But it exists in our law because our ancestors understood that not every person who enters a conflict enters it the same way or with the same purpose. The noble from House Vreth was still at the side door. He was looking at the document in his hands. The argument had been made and met, and the room had shifted, and he was holding a piece of formal paper that felt, I suspected, considerably lighter than it had when he walked in. I walked across the hall to him. Greg's expression in my peripheral vision was the expression of a man watching someone do exactly what he had been told not to do, while finding he cannot bring himself to intervene. I stopped in front of the noble, close enough for him to hear without needing to be overheard by the full hall. I do not know which soldier was your son, I said, in thrill. I do not know if I was in the part of that field where he fell. What I know is this: if he was within reach of what I could do, I would have done it, the same as I would have done it for anyone else in that place. He looked up from the document. That is not enough, I said. I know it is not. It does not close what is open. It does not pay what is owed. But it is what I have, and I am giving it to you honestly. He was quiet for a long time. Then he folded the document. Once, twice, held it against his chest, in the thrill gesture for carrying something that is not yet resolved but has been received. He stepped back, out of the ceremony floor. He did not leave the hall. He moved to the side of the room and stood. I walked back to Vask. She looked at me with an expression I had not seen on her before. Not the controlled diplomatic precision, not the almost smile. Something underneath all of it, the thing that had been running quiet and deep since a corridor, with memorial markers and a conversation about why she had picked a name from a war record. I held her gaze and did not look away. Hesh cleared her throat exactly once, which was the most human thing I had seen a thrall do, and the ceremony resumed. Stage 6. The Spoken Exchanges. Vask's formal speech was fully memorized and delivered with the kind of steady clarity that would be quoted in the record for a long time. I caught every word. I held the response phrase ready, checking the vowels one final time inside my own head. Stage 7. My one phrase. I said it. Correct vowels, correct tonal register, correct placement. Hesh's expression remained neutral. That was her version of outstanding. The gesture. Right hand open, placed against the left collarbone of the other person. Vask placed her hand against mine first. Then I placed mine against hers. Not ownership, not possession. I vouch for this individual's presence in my home and among my people. The hall responded. Not applause in the human sense, but the threll equivalent. A low collective sound and a formal inclination of heads throughout the room, everyone present acknowledging at once what had just been made real. The matriarch stood. She spoke for approximately 4 minutes in Old High Threll, which I followed at about 70%. But the center of it was clear. The alliance was recognized, the ceasefire was formalized, and the war was, in the most complete legal sense available, over. The noble from House Vreth was still standing against the wall when the ceremony concluded. I passed him on the way out. He said one word in Threll to me, quietly, as I went by. An old word, not common. It meant witness, as in, I was here, and I saw this, and I will carry it. I nodded. That was the whole exchange. It was enough. Greg found me shortly after in the inner corridor, the one with the memorial markers, which had become without any deliberate planning on my part the place I returned to when I needed a moment away from the formal spaces. 4 reports filed, he said, working on the 5th one now, covering the blood debt challenge and your decision to cross the ceremony floor during an active formal proceeding. How is it coming? The matriarch's office already sent a preliminary communication to our government. Positive framing. They are emphasizing the Varsul legal framework. He was quiet for a moment. You are going to be in history books, Cole. Threll history books. I want you to understand the weight of that. I am mostly thinking about my ribs, I said. Your ribs? They had a difficult few days. Greg ate his last protein ration square. He was going to need a resupply soon. We did it, he said. Not triumphant, just real. The voice of a person who had spent a long time not being sure, and was carefully, incrementally, beginning to believe it. Yes, I said. He nodded. He left. I stood alone in the corridor for a while. The memorial markers ran in both directions, further than I had walked before. Vask came from the far end of the corridor, still in her ceremony attire. She crossed to the wall and stopped 6 steps to my left at a marker positioned at shoulder height, slightly larger than those around it, carved with precision that meant someone had spent real time and real attention on it. I moved to stand beside her and looked at it. Vareth's marker, I said. She did not confirm it. She did not need to. He would have argued with you today, she said, about the blood debt challenge, about the legal framework, about whether a human medic had any business standing in this hall. What would you have told him? That he was wrong, she said, and that he could argue about it for as long as he needed to, and that eventually he would see it for himself. You were close, I said. We were opposite, she said. Which is not the same thing, but functions similarly. I looked down. At the base of Vareth's marker, someone had placed a small object. A writing implement, simple and functional, the Threll equivalent of a pen. I stood looking at it for a moment. Then I reached into my jacket pocket, where I had been carrying since Tuesday in Charleston, the pen that had rolled under the plastic chair in the VA waiting room, the one I had watched go, and not retrieved, because my ribs had objected. I had picked it up off the floor on the way out the door. No particular reason, just habit, the kind of thing a medic does without deciding to. I set it on the floor next to the Threll writing implement, one human pen, one Threll one, on the stone floor of a corridor, on a planet that was not mine, in front of a marker for a young soldier who had believed in a war that was now, in the most formal and complete sense available, finished. Vask looked at the pen, then at me. He would have been 24 now, she said. I know, I said. We stood there together in the amber light, while the compound moved and adjusted, and the word traveled outward through channels and communications and official records that 49 warships were standing down, that a ceasefire had become something with more structure and more weight, that the war was over. That was what the history books would say. They would be right. But that is not what I remember when I think about that morning. I remember the pen on the stone floor, the amber light, a woman who had built something careful and deliberate out of grief, instead of letting the grief build something else. Two writing implements next to each other at the base of a memorial marker, one from either side of a line that did not exist anymore. Small, quiet, honest. That was the whole story. Not the peace treaty, not the ceremony or the legal framework, or the 49 warships standing down somewhere at the edge of known space. Just a man who stayed, a pen on a stone floor, and silence that did not need to be filled.